Hi guys, so this lesson is on cell structure and microscopes. Let's look at cells first. What is a cell? A cell is a basic unit of life. Now what does that mean? This means that every living organism will have at least one cell inside it. Now that's a unicellular organism with one cell, right? But multicellular organisms will have millions and billions of these cells. Now, remember when I told you about the domains eukaryote and prokaryote, and I told you that they're divided based on their cell structure? This is where we're going to talk about that cell structure that I told you. So, under the domain eukaryote, we said that there's going to be cells with membrane bound organelles, right? This means that inside the cell, there's going to be tiny other structures that will have their own membranes. Now, for our focus here, there's going to be plant cells and animal cells in the eukaryotic domain. Then we talked about prokaryotes, where we said that they're similar but not the same because they do not contain membrane bound organelles. And prokaryotes are usually the unicellular ones. In this case, we're going to discuss a bacterial cell. So our focus here is animal, plant, and bacterial cells. Let's get started on animal cells first. Now, as a reminder, because cells are basic units, this means that they're very tiny. You cannot see them from your naked eye. We call this a microscopic structure. This, by its name, obviously, means that you have to see it through a microscope. Now, there's two types of microscopes that I'm going to discuss later on in this lesson. There's your regular light microscope, and then there's an electron microscope, which is slightly stronger and has a better image production. So you're going to see a cell and its organelles better under an electron microscope. Now let's start from the outside, going into an animal cell. So the outermost covering of an animal cell is a very thin layer of membrane that's made up of lipids or fats and proteins. This is called the cell membrane. Now, the function of the cell membrane is that it controls what goes into the cell and what goes out of the cell. There are certain molecules that are small enough to squeeze through the cell membrane, and there are certain molecules that cannot go through, like large proteins. Now, again, there are organelles within the cell, right, that we haven't discussed yet. But those organelles, they need to stay inside the cell, right? So one of the functions of the cell membrane is not only to control what comes into the cell, but also to prevent the organelles from escaping the cell. Now, this allowing of certain substances to cross the membrane and not allowing certain substances to cross it is called partial permeability or semi-permeability, which means that some things are allowed to go in and out and some things are not. Now, let's get inside the cell. So, there's a jelly-like substance that is present within this cell membrane. This is called cytoplasm. Now, this part of the cell is mostly made up of water, about 70%. Now, this cytoplasm, because it's made up mostly of water, it functions to facilitate chemical reactions by dissolving the chemicals within the cytoplasm itself. And then also, it provides a medium for all the rest of the organelles to float in, obviously. Now, the chemical reactions I just mentioned are specific to a living organism, right? So any chemical reaction that happens within a living organism is called a metabolic reaction. Now, metabolic reactions are divided into anabolic and catabolic, or making reactions or breaking reactions. Alright, that's enough information about the cytoplasm for now. Let's move on to the big boss, the nucleus. Now, why would I call this the big boss? Watch. So this guy stores all of our genetic information in the form of chromosomes, which are made of DNA. This means that it gets to control all the activities of the cell, including which proteins to make and to release, as well as cell division itself. Now, these chromosomes can't even be seen through even the strongest microscope, like I told you about the electron microscopes, right? These can only be seen when the cell is dividing or in its division phase. That's when the chromosomes stop being thread-like structures and start becoming thicker and shorter. So the nucleus essentially bosses the rest of the organelles around. Now, you've probably heard the phrase, mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell at least once in your life. But let's really dive into what that really means. Mitochondria perform the single most important metabolic reaction in any animal, respiration. So what exactly is respiration? Let's look at this simplified equation to understand it better. So this says glucose and oxygen combine to form carbon dioxide and water, and obviously release energy. Now, this usage of oxygen to make energy is called aerobic respiration. Now, since there is an aerobic respiration, there's obviously going to be an anaerobic respiration that doesn't require oxygen. So, what you need to remember is that aerobic respiration is the main form of respiration in an animal cell. So, the mitochondria essentially utilize the food that we eat and the air that we breathe to make energy for the body. So, since they're a source of energy, they're referred to as the powerhouses, in which case it would make sense that the cells that utilize more energy would have more mitochondria. For example, muscle cells. Our muscles are constantly moving, right? So, our muscle cells will usually have more and more mitochondria. Now, do you see these tiny, tiny dots that I've made next to the nucleus? These are the ribosomes. These ribosomes are placed on another organelle called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and they're otherwise freely floating within the cytoplasm as well. Now, ribosomes are responsible for protein production. This happens by joining the protein subunits called amino acids together in a chain. And as a reminder, these instructions to make the protein are coming from the nucleus. And finally, there's these tiny, tiny bubbles that you can see. These are called vacuoles or vesicles. Now, vesicles contain mostly water or a sugary solution. Now, these aren't too important for animal cells. They don't have much of a function. They appear, disappear, reappear whenever they feel like it. But in plant cells, these vacuoles are much larger and much more important. So we're going to look at that next. Alright guys, enough about animal cells. Let's talk about plant cells now. So these, like animal cells, have a cell membrane, cytoplasm, a nucleus, mitochondria, and ribosomes. The difference though is that they have certain additional features that make them more adapted to be plants. Like the most obvious feature here is that the shape is very different from an animal cell, right? They've got a more definite, more geometrical shape. Now, this is because of an external covering even outside their cell membrane called a cell wall. Now, this cell wall is made of a tough carbohydrate structure called cellulose. Now, this cellulose is arranged in a meshwork of fibers which makes it really strong. So, this sort of gives a shape or strength, you could say, to a plant cell. Now, the reason I say strength is because sometimes a cell fills up with so much water that it ends up bursting. But a plant cell doesn't usually burst because this cell wall is strong enough to protect it. Now, how that water filling and all of that happens is not your concern right now. What's important to know is the basic function of the cell wall. Now, unlike the cell membrane, the cell wall is fully permeable, which means it allows all substances, big or small, to pass through. This is because the function of the cell wall has nothing to do with the allowance of substances in and out. It's working on the strength and the structure and the shape of the plant cell, right? Now, the next additional feature that is pretty obvious here is a chloroplast. Now, you've probably heard this word before, but let's just go into a little bit of detail of what a chloroplast is and what it does. We all know that plants are autotrophs, right? That means they make their own food. Now, this making of their own food is essentially what the chloroplast is for. This chloroplast contains a pigment called chlorophyll, which traps light energy, and that energy is then used to make glucose and oxygen. Alright, one more obvious thing that you probably see here is this huge bubble in the center. This is what I skipped out on in animal cells, if you recall. I said vacuoles are very tiny and very almost useless in an animal cell, right? But I told you that in a plant cell, these are going to be useful. So in a plant cell, quite obviously, a vacuole is a very large organelle, and it's placed centrally, which is to assist the cell wall in providing a regular shape to the plant cell. So cell walls and vacuoles essentially work together. Another feature of the vacuole is that it contains this sugary substance called the cell sap. This is basically the plant's food. Now, the rest of the organelles are pretty familiar to you by now from animal cells, and since we've already discussed them, I'm not going to repeat it. So as a quick overview, we have done plant cells and animal cells, and we've discussed the differences between them. Some of these key differences being the presence or absence of a cellulose cell wall, or the difference in their size of their vacuoles, or the presence or absence of chloroplasts. Alright, just to remind you guys that every single organelle that we've done, except for ribosomes, is a membrane-bound organelle. Alright, next up are prokaryotic cells, and the best example we always use is a bacterial cell. Now, if we zoom in on the structure of a bacterial cell, it's actually much simpler than a eukaryotic cell. Firstly, it's much smaller. Secondly, it's got no membrane-bound organelles within it. Now, that means organelles like mitochondria, nucleus, chloroplasts, they're all ruled out. But remember how I said all the eukaryotic cell organelles except for ribosomes are membrane-bound? This is why bacterial cells contain ribosomes, because they're not membrane-bound organelles. Alright, what else do we have here? We've got a cell membrane, there's a cell wall surrounding the cell membrane, there is a capsule surrounding it from time to time, which I haven't shown here because it's not always present. Then of course they've got their cytoplasm inside, and then they've got this genetic material meshwork in the center, if you can see that. Now this is different from the chromosomes that were in the nuclei of a eukaryotic cell, right? This is freely floating. Now there are other tiny rings of genetic material called plasmids also freely floating in the cytoplasm. And then because they're unicellular organisms, they need something to be able to move around. So they could have a flagellum or they could have cilia around them. These are all just like tiny tails to help them move. Now these bacteria can be harmful to us, they can be helpful to us, or they could just not affect us at all. Like pneumonia and tuberculosis are diseases that bacteria cause in humans. But at the same time, other bacteria are used to make drugs like insulin. Bacteria can be autotrophic or heterotrophic despite not having chloroplasts. And they have their own weird way of doing this. While as a heterotroph, they'll be decomposers, so they'd be eating on organic matter like fungi do. Alright, let's review this real quick. We talked about how prokaryotic cells are much smaller than eukaryotic cells. Then we talked about how they don't have membrane-bound organelles, but they do have ribosomes because those aren't membrane-bound. Then we talked about the placement and arrangement of their genetic material. Then we talked about how they're unicellular and how they need their tails to swim. We also discussed that some bacteria are harmful, some are helpful, some are completely harmless. And then we also talked about how bacteria can be autotrophic or heterotrophic, in which case they would be decomposers. Alright, wake up guys, answer this question. The diagram shows some of the structures in a plant cell. Which labeled parts show a sap vacuole, a nucleus, and a chloroplast? Now, if you remember the labelings from before, we know that the central large thing here is the sap vacuole, and then we know that this dark organelle is a nucleus, and the rest of the multiple organelles around it are the chloroplasts. So did you get B as the right answer? This one was pretty easy, wasn't it? Alright, let's take this a step further. Try to pause the video and label all of these structures. And also as a bonus, tell me what kind of cell this is. So did you get these right? And yes, this is a prokaryotic cell or a bacterial cell. So guys, that finishes our discussion on cells. Now let's talk about how exactly to look at these cells. I told you that cells are so tiny that you can't see them with your eyes alone. So for that, you need an instrument called a microscope. Now what you see here is a typical light microscope that you'll probably see in the laboratory at your school. Now the whole point of a microscope is to magnify something, right? It's a very tiny structure that you're going to want to magnify in order to see it clearly. Like a magnifying glass if you've seen one. Now to prepare what you want to see, you sort of make a slide and you put that particular cell or tissue or whatever it is you want to see between two thin sheets of glass. This preparation is called a specimen inside a slide. Now right above this slide are three sort of extensions that you can see. These are your lenses. These are essentially the magnifiers that are going to be enlarging the specimen that you're using. Now, the image produced after being magnified is essentially called a photomicrograph. Now, these lenses on a light microscope can only expand the image up to 100 times, maybe. But that's not nearly enough for such a tiny structure to be seen. So, while this regular or light microscope is able to magnify a cell quite a bit, it's still not able to do it as much as scientists would have liked to study it. So, they then came up with an electron microscope. Now, this electron microscope used an electron beam instead of a light ray, as it says in the name, to magnify the image. And for that reason, the image produced was much more enhanced and much more magnified than that in the light microscope. So, while an electron microscope can show more detail inside a cell, there are a few drawbacks of it. Electron beams need a vacuum to travel through them. So, that means the specimen that you're using has to be dead. So, you cannot view live specimen or live cells under an electron microscope. Another thing is that since there's no light, there's no color. So, electron microscopes always make an image that is black, white, or gray. Now, since we've talked about a microscope magnifying certain things, we're going to have to think about how many times it's magnifying it. And if we're able to even calculate that, let's say if the magnifying lens does not say how much it's multiplying the image to be, so we need to be able to calculate it ourselves. Alright, let me make this simple for you. Let's make a bit of a mind map. What values or measurements can we possibly attain here? The magnification of the microscope, the size of the image produced of a specimen after magnification or the photomicrograph, and the actual size of the specimen itself, right? So of these three values, any one of them can be calculated provided the other two are present. Now let me show you how. Magnification is equal to the image size over the object size. That means that the image produced that you see from your eye is going to be in the numerator, and the object itself, as small as it is going to be in the denominator. So you will divide the two in order to get the amount of magnification or the multiplication of the size of the specimen. It's really just simple math if you think about it, because you're enlarging an image a certain number of times, right? Now, another important thing here is that if you're calculating magnification, for example, the answer that you're going to get will be written with an x next to it, or a multiplication sign basically. Now, similarly, in a question, you'll always be given two of three values that I've mentioned here. So you'll have to rearrange the formula in a way that suits the question best. For this, I've given you this little triangle or pyramid, if you want to call it, so that you can easily plug in whichever value you've got in order to get a value that you don't have. So if, for example, we know the magnification value and the size of the image produced, we could divide the two to find out the actual size of the specimen itself, or the object size. Another thing to always remember is that cells are usually measured in micrometers, and our magnified image is usually measured in millimeters. So it's important for you to know how to convert millimeters to micrometers and vice versa. So 1 millimeter is essentially 1,000 micrometers. Now, keeping that in mind, when you're dividing the two values, they both need to be in the same units. So either you convert the micrometers to millimeters or vice versa. This will all make sense when we do an example, don't worry. Alright, here's a classic example. So this question says, figure 3.1 is a photomicrograph showing part of a capillary network of a woman. The structure labeled X is a red blood cell. So capillaries are basically very tiny blood vessels, and red blood cells are, well, the cells inside the blood. So what they're saying is that the diameter of cell X in the photomicrograph is 10 millimeter, and they're asking you to calculate the actual diameter of cell X. Now notice on the bottom right of this image, there is a number written next to an X. It says X1250. This means that this photomicrograph has been enlarged by 1,250 times. And that's how you write the magnification next to an image. Now the question is also mentioned in the last line that they want us to express our answers in micrometers. So your immediate first step should be to convert 10 millimeters into micrometers. And that would be 10,000 micrometers, right? Now the next step should be to recall the formula. So even though the formula went something like magnification is equal to image size upon object size, over here you notice that we have the magnification and we have the image size. So if we rearrange this formula, we'll realize that we have to be dividing the image by the magnification in order to get the actual size. Now always remember to show the formula and your working because that stuff carries marks. Notice how it says 3 marks there? Those 3 marks aren't just for you to write an answer. It's for you to actually show the steps that you understood how you got to this answer. And finally, do not forget the units in your answer, guys. This one's very easily missed out. Okay, so quick recap of this lesson. We've talked about different types of cells, their structures, the functions of those structures, and then a little bit about microscopes and magnification. So the cells that we spoke about were the eukaryotic cells or the animal and plant cells, and then the prokaryotic cells, which were the bacterial cells. We discussed some of their similarities and their differences and how they're adapted to function differently. During this time, you also learned a few key words that I highlighted here and there, which you're going to be hearing a lot more of in your biology lessons. Then we talked about the differences between a light microscope and an electron microscope, and I showed you the differences in the images that they produce. And finally, we talked about the magnification formula and we applied it on a question. You answered a few other questions for me here and there. And with that, we ended our lesson. Thanks for joining, guys. I'll see you next time.